This is my dry sourdough starter, so I was going to make a video to show you how to use dry starter, which means you do not have to do discard with your sourdough, but it did not work, which I will strengthen it and show you in a future video how to make dry sourdough starter. But for this video, I wanted to show you when I woke up and noticed that the sourdough bread had not risen overnight. I went ahead and salvaged this recipe and made a totally different recipe. So you can see there's just maybe a little bit of rise in it, barely anything, but it's still nice and moist, and I could tell that I would be able to bake focaccia bread with it. So I will link the recipe below that I used. I just skipped over the first 4 steps, which was preparing the dough and letting it rise overnight. And then step number 5 is when you shape it and get it into your baking dish to kind of rise and take shape to bake the focaccia bread. So if you make sourdough bread, or if you're new to it, sometimes it doesn't rise, and sometimes there's just no good reason and you wake up and it hasn't done as well as you expected, but there is always a way to kind of salvage it. So if you add yeast to your bread, you could bake it that way to get just a quick rise. I believe if it's active yeast, you do have to put it in the sugar water to get it to activate before you add it to your dough. But if you have instant yeast, you should be able to just incorporate it right into your dough, and then it will rise as it bakes. You can correct me in the comments if I'm wrong about that, but that is my understanding that I have read before. I typically don't add yeast in to save it. I want to just use the sourdough up the best I can and not waste any more ingredients. So this, I just added some olive oil to the top, and I just put it back in the oven for hours. I mean, I just gave it as much time as it needed to kind of take some shape. You could see here it did get a little bit more body to it. The top dried out a little bit, but it's not a big deal. I just add the olive oil on top. I also coated it with some sea salt and rosemary to bake it, and it was delicious at the end. Other options, if your sourdough does not rise, is to just go ahead, shape it, maybe give it a few more hours to see if it will, get some body to it, and then bake it like normal. You might not need to bake it quite as long, but then you could crumble it up like breadcrumbs, you could cut it into croutons, you could even make French toast out of it. There's just ways to use up bread, even if it's not the best texture. This focaccia bread was perfect. We were having spaghetti for dinner, so it was the perfect side. The rosemary on top was delicious. It's my belief that you can make any bread delicious if you slather it in butter, so that was a really nice way to use up the sourdough without throwing it away. If you've made focaccia in the past, which I have a few times with yeast, you'll know that it bubbles up and it's really airy and has nice air pockets in it. So this is a little bit different texture, but it still was, crumbly, moist, and it worked out just fine. Bon appetit! I hope this video helped you see some options that you could do with your sourdough if it does not rise. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next video.